That's kind of what I was thinking. Was here she is, low as she can go. And who's this?
You got a lot of nerves say something like that to me.
I got a redheaded aunt. I'd hate to see her fly off at that comment. She's very outspoken, but I just picture some of my own family, like I said, their reaction. Who do you think you know? And even then, she was in sorrow. He had compassion on her, and he changed the situation for sure. Number 4, he touched the briar or the coffin, is the American standard, and the men did what?
Stood still.
Stopped. They stood still. Don't know really why the Holy Spirit had that in there, but he didn't speak to them. He just kind of motioned to touch the coffin that they're carrying the dead in, and they stood still. They stopped. I guess they had heard him tell the woman to weep not, and they were ready to see what was going to happen.
And try to see it in our day. Well, you try to avoid getting in the way of people and staying out of situations, and yet here in the middle of a tragic situation moving forward, and Jesus steps right in the middle of it and stops it. It just doesn't, how does that work as far as people, how would people react if we got in the way of a funeral procession or whatever like that and stop?
Being in the South, that is a unique, I think, joining the rest of that. But more and more, you don't see people stopping, much less, in this case, stopping everything, the whole procession.
People coming from different parts of the country, it's not a tradition or way that they do things. So,
I've witnessed a few near misses because people were stopping, seeing a funeral coming at them. They're like looking around, why are y'all stopping? We've got 4 lanes here. People pull it off. But yeah, we get wrapped up in our little world, and we don't see what's going on around us. Another one of my easy answers, the last word in Luke 7:14. Arise. Raising someone from the dead. We know that this is, the miracle within himself that Jesus himself is going to be part of. But in this case, very short reading, he shows up on the scene, speaks to the mother, then speaks to the young man. I say unto thee, arise. And in that instant, verse 15, the dead sat up and began to speak. And he, being Jesus, delivered him to his mother. And then obviously the fear was spread. Who is this? And then also they glorified God. We're going to see later on that in another situation after a miracle, Jesus is worshipped. And hopefully I can get down to a point here in a few minutes where, as Jesus does a couple of miracles, he uses it for a teaching point that I guess up until this past week I missed. I was dreading talking about one of the miracles that Jesus performed that didn't fit in what my mind should have been. But I finally, I think, got my head wrapped around what went on actually. But he always did something to it. There was always, either showing someone that he was the Son of God, he was the Messiah, he was the one that was prophesied, he was the one that should be worshipped. He was the one that would be raised from the dead later. And worthy of all our praise and admiration.
Something that stood out to me about that was kind of telling you what fear of God, fear of Jesus creates instead of, I don't think it's explained a lot of times, but that is almost clearly outlined in here.
Yeah, exactly. The result was they glorified God. In this case, others, they basically begged him to leave. I think that was one of the areas many weeks ago. Uh, May have been when the demons were cast into the swine, and they begged him to leave their country. You'd think that would be just the opposite. You'd rather beg him to stay in hell, stay and heal others, do other good things. In this case, like I said, a fear on all. And they glorified God, saying that a great prophet is risen up among us, and that God hath visited his people.
The common people, they recognized the miracles and they had fear or awe of God and responded that way. But you think about the Pharisees, their doctrine was that of the resurrection. Jesus came and resurrected somebody. What was their reaction to it? Rather than saying this is confirmation for what we believe, reinforcing their belief and making it stronger as far as faith, they totally rejected or ignored it or tried to dispel it because even though they taught it, the idea that it was going to cause them problems as far as their lives in this world, the position, the power, all that was going to be destroyed because of that. And so they decided that, their position was more important than their doctrine. And so they didn't have anything to do with it.
That's an excellent point. It feeds right into one of the other miracles we're going to get into here in a second. Position more important than their doctrine. How about they love the chief seats and the greetings in the meeting place. I mean, their ego was built up, and they couldn't see that this was wrong. And here was Christ, perfect example, and they couldn't see it. Any other questions about the first healing this morning, or raising the dead here in Luke 7? Doing this lesson a little different than before. Before we just read a bunch of verses and chapters and tied them all together. This is going to be in 3 sections. The second section starts with number 6 from Mark 8. If you will, let's flip over there and read Mark 8, 21 through 30 together. Actually, starting at 22 through 30.
And he cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man to him, and besought him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes, and he put his hands upon him, he asked him if he saw all. And he looked up and said, I see men as trees walking. After he had put his hands again on his eyes, he made him look up, and he was restored and saw every man clearly. And he sent him away to his house, saying, neither go into the town, nor tell it to any in the town.
30.
Jesus went out and his disciples into the towns of Caesarea and Philippi, and by the way he asked his disciples, saying unto them, whom do men say that I am? And they answered, John the Baptist, but some say Elias, and others one of the prophets. And he saith unto them, but whom say ye that I am? And Peter answered and saith unto him, thou art the Christ. And he charged them that they should tell no man of him.
Okay, thank you. Here, this is the one that I was kind of spelling, the miracle that I kind of was having some issues with, and I joked about. All the other times, how much emphasis I put on immediately receive his sight, immediately raised from the dead. That very hour, we talked about that several times, and I was looking at this, I guess, like the apostles were, like the disciples were. And I want to go ahead and read the rest of the passage because I found a reference that kind of opened a little different angle. It wasn't a failure, the first one. It was a teaching opportunity. Number one, the question that I asked was, Jesus took the blind man out of what? Out of town. Again, took him, away from the people. But who was with him? Who lived with Christ? Who was with him? His disciples, obviously, and others that followed him. And I think that's a key point. If you look at number 7, this is kind of what I was getting hung up on. Jesus had healed several blind before, and had ever taken twice or many times. It had always been kind of like what Paul's, when he received his sight, he received it and immediately began to do things. This case, though, he sees the first time in verse 24. At first, the man said that he saw men walking about his what? His trees. Fuzzy, different, disoriented. Something was moving, but you really couldn't make out what it was. And that really wasn't a failure on Jesus' part. I don't know what what rabbit hole I was heading down, but that was not where we needed to go with that lesson. What was going on here? Walking about his tree. Number 9, he said that Jesus thanked God and touched the man's eyes again. True or false? Verse 25. Part of it's true, part of it's false. What did he not do? Or what are we not told?
He didn't thank God, but he did touch him again.
If you remember some of my questions a couple of weeks ago, I took completely the wrong verse as an evidence. It sounded good, it fit, but he didn't thank God in that verse. This time about the man. So that part made it false. We just read that Jesus sent him away to his own city to report to the priest.
Told him not to go back into town.
Right. Tell no man. And he tells the apostles or his disciples later, it's very similar, not to tell anyone who he is. At this time, obviously, the fame was growing. Jesus was trying to kind of maintain some sense of order. We talk about mobs making their king. Talk about other people hanging, killing, and stoning. So he was doing this, and the people that were healed had no doubt who did this. Had no doubt who had restored their sight, or in this case, gave this man this blessing. Verse 37 and 30 says Jesus tells the blank to tell blank of him. The disciples to tell no man of him. Very different than what the charges were when he was going out to teach all people, all nations, with the mission, who he was and what his mission was. But again, at this time, it was a little different. The key to, turning this lesson around on myself and making clearer, one little reference down at the bottom of a footnote or something that said Jesus used should have brought it. The healing of this man, this blind man, was more to teach the disciples that they should see clearly, that they were the ones that were, in a sense, blind. They didn't see what Jesus was doing, what he was capable of, what he was teaching. And everywhere Jesus went, he was teaching he was the Christ. And yet still they, at first, didn't recognize this. Didn't recognize the teaching of Jesus. Later on, they even asked about restoring the kingdom. Will you restore the kingdom at this time? Jesus is amazed how they're hard-hearted in unbelief. They had missed what he was teaching. And the parallel was that as the disciples spent time with Jesus, saw the miracles, that they too began to see clearer. And I think that was in a sense, explained to me why this miracle took twice. It wasn't for the blind man, and it wasn't for Jesus. It was for the disciples to kind of see a parallel between what they were going through. Any comments? Anybody else have anything like that in their mind about why this?
How Jesus sometimes tells them to tell and not to tell, but all because he knew the timing of how it had to be to fulfill God's whole purpose. So if he did it this way this time, it would change how it's supposed to go.
Yeah, that was in the different cities. They did different things, and like you said, the timing. It wasn't.
You know what the repercussions would be if we told here, it may not allow him to go here. So just saw how interesting that he understood that he had to fulfill it in a certain way, at a certain time.
I think it's kind of feeds along with what you just said. Like the very next page over, of course, we talk about where Peter says, "Thou art the Christ," and he talks about, I don't know if you see the word, but and he began to teach in verse 31 that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days would rise again. They spake the same over.
He just gone in and made a big show and, set it all up. He reached everybody he needed to reach.
I also think of it just like us as new Christians. Your babes can't, take all the strong meat. It just takes time. And yes, they were with him, but this was new to them as well. It just takes time to understand it all. So even though they knew everything, and then later they keep everybody's like, oh, now
Well,
I
and you think about a person that's never seen before. I don't think with Jesus couldn't kill him just like that. I mean, I can't see without contacts, so when you go to first go in, it takes a minute to focus and to get them all adjusted and to see things, and things do look stretched and not sort of. But it was a teaching purpose for Jesus, like you said.
And that's a couple of weeks ago, if you remember, I said I had problems with this.
And you think about somebody that's never seen before. I mean, give them their sight. What are they going to know how to describe things that they've never seen?
You have people that never walked, that are evil, suddenly they can walk. They don't have to go through physical therapy, they don't have to learn the violence and the game or anything like that. They automatically are walking away. So,
It's, the key, like you said, at the end, he saw clearly. And hopefully, the disciples, between this time and the day of Pentecost, they get their eyes open and they see clearly also. Moving on to the third miracle of today's lesson. If you will flip over to John chapter 9. This one went just the other direction. I talked about how how much information wasn't really in a lot of the readings, and this one goes into almost a debate. It's interesting. We've all heard about the arguments, but John 9, it starts off with like verse 12, 10 or 12 verses talk about the miracle and the healing, and then it goes into basically the debate that we're talking about with the Pharisees. I think it's interesting, and if you will, someone starts off with verse 1 or 2, and we're going to read down through verse 41, and then talk about the attitudes that changed and the things that were shifted because of this one miracle. It's currently verse 1 of chapter 9.
now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And when he said these things, he spelled the ground and made a clay with slime. And he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, go wash the pool of Siloam, which is translated sin. And he went and washed and came back seeing.
The neighbors therefore, and those who before had seen him, that he was blind, said, is not this he that sat and begged? Some said, this is he. Others said, he is like him. But he said, I am he. Therefore said they to him, how were thine eyes opened? And And he answered and said, a man that is called Jesus made clay and anointed mine eyes and said unto me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and washed, and I received sight. Then said they unto him, where is he? He said, I know not. They brought to the Pharisee him that aforetime was blind, and it was the Sabbath day, and Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then again the Pharisees also asked him how long he had received his sight. He said unto them, he put clay upon mine eyes, and I washed, and do see. Therefore said some of the Pharisees, this man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. Others said, how can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? And there was a division among them. They say unto the blind man again, what sayest thou of him, that he hath opened thine eyes? He said, he is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him, that he had been blind, and received his sight, until they called the parents of him that had received his sight. And they asked them, saying, is this your son, who ye say was born blind? How then doth he now see? His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now seeth, we know not. Or who hath opened his eyes, we know not. He is of age, ask him. He shall speak for himself.
These words spoke his parents because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess that he was Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. Therefore said his parents, he is of age, ask him. And again calleth they the man that was blind, and said unto him, give God the praise, we know that this man is a sinner. He answered and said, whether he be a sinner or not, I know not one thing. I know that whether I was blind, now I see. Then said they to him again, what did he to thee? How opened he thy eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and ye did not hear. Wherefore will ye hear? If again will ye also be his disciples? Then they revealed him and said, thou art his disciples, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spake unto Moses, as for this fellow we know not from whence he is.
The man answered and said unto them, why herein is a marvelous thing, that ye know not from whence he is, and yet he hath opened mine eyes. Now we know that God heareth not sinners, but if any man be a worshipper of God, and doeth his will, him he heareth. Since the world began, was it not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind? If this man were not of God, he could do nothing. Then answered and said unto him, thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said unto him, dost thou believe on the Son of God? He answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? And Jesus said unto him, thou hast been both seen him, and it is he that talketh with thee. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. And Jesus said, for judgment I am come into this world, that they might see, not might see, which not see, and they which see might be blind. And some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words, and said unto him, are you blind also? Jesus said unto them, if ye were blind, ye should have no sin. But now ye say, we see, therefore your sin is vanished.
Appreciate that. Like I said, this whole chapter became a reference record of what Jesus had done. And we talked about earlier about not telling anyone here in the synagogue. We have his parents. Obviously, they feared the Jews. Some of the key words that we talked about in the whole chapter just kept coming back and forth. And I thought it was interesting there when the blind man that was healed was talking to the Pharisees. You know, if I say it again, will you hear it this time, basically? He was a blind man, and they accused him of being a sinner. And, he should be the one doing the teaching. He's a sinner. He shouldn't even be in our midst, basically. The questions before we close out this morning. It says Jesus refers to himself as the blank of the blank in verse number 5. Light of the world. Several references, good and evil, but here Jesus refers to himself as the light of the world. And he must do the works of him that sent me while it is day, for the night cometh when no man can work. And then he had spoken these words. He made the spittle on the ground and healed the man. This case was a little different also than others because he said, go wash in the pool of Siloam. If you need any evidence that people are listening to us, there was some things popped up on my homepage about the pool of Siloam. 3 months ago, they were going to dig it up and excavate it. And I kind of thought that was a little tricky because I hadn't done any searches about the pool of Siloam at the time, but we had talked about it in the lesson in class about this pool. And he was told to go wash there. And he went and washed there. And like Naaman in the Old Testament, after he'd washed, he received his sight. So he did what Jesus told him to do. Number 15, kind of a backwards question, also points out that the parents were both dead and their son was made whole. That's false. His parents were both alive, and they were both knew where the synagogue was. Number 16, A and B. For time's sake, I'll tell you what my mind was going and where we were going with that question. There was division among the Pharisees because Jesus healed on the Sabbath day. And then where was this man cast out of?
Synagogue.
Out of the synagogue. And that's kind of a couple of key points that kind of feed into what we talked about earlier about these Pharisees. And in their mind, and there you go. Here was a man who was blind, born blind, and he was healed. But they didn't see that. They just saw that he didn't need to be there. He was there. The other question I had that was kind of a twisted question. I'm going to take that out. No, 14. Jesus said that this man was born in sin from verse 34. No. Who said that? The people. The people answered and said, that was altogether born in sin. So they were mistaken. Christ had already said that this man or his parents, up in verse 2 and 3, neither one were in sin at the time. But this man was born blind that God would be glorified. 3 words did the blind man say to Jesus? When Trina read this about when they met, the blind man was looking, talking with Jesus, and Jesus refers that he had seen him. What 3 words did the blind man say there? First, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. And that's where I got my title for today's lesson. And then, oddly enough, in my mind, I thought it was the key point, verse 41, the last verse we read. So some of the blanks were with Jesus, and this teaches us about the seeing and not seeing again after these miracles were performed. Verse 41, who was with Christ still? Or 40.
Pharisees.
Some of the Pharisees. Had he won some of them over? Maybe. How could they defend what they were doing? And with that, I appreciate the reading today. I know the last the miracle, like I said, it became the whole chapter quickly. But I think it's interesting when you look at the conversation that the man that was just healed basically had to defend himself. You know, why did he done no wrong? And they were accusing him and cast him out. But then he found Christ. So with that, I appreciate, like I said, your attendance, your reading especially, and we'll pick up again next week, and I'll get with the list to find out where we're at. I think we're down to 25 as far as the order of miracles that we're on for next week. Thank you again.